Kelly may leave. No, there we come. There we come. Now, there's one other thing we wanted to do to start with tonight. I want everybody to get just as quiet as you can get. You breathe real softly. Do you hear it? That's the way it sounds at the Jacobs house, because they're all gone. He's going to be gone shortly. No, they're not used to that. They don't have any idea what quiet is around the house. Sacrifice. Well, it's been a wonderful study. It's been 13 weeks of seek, serve, and sacrifice, and I don't know who put it all together. I have a sneaky suspicion I know who did. But I think it's been one of the better summer series that we've been involved in, and the better summer series that I've been involved in, because I've been in several Wednesday night services in the last few years to do something like this. So what I want you to do now, we have seek, we have served, and now in the last 4 weeks, we have sacrifice. So I want you to go back in your memory, go way back in your memory, and turn up all those last speeches, our lessons, and pick out the finest point that was made. You got it? That's my lesson. Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming to that. Sacrifice. And I'm not going to preach tonight. We're going to do this a lot like a class. But what I wanted to ask you is, what is a sacrifice? I don't know that Randy talked about a living sacrifice, and Jimmy talked about Jesus, our example of sacrifice, and Kelly last week, and I just tore up the mic. And Kelly last week talked to us about, week before last, talked to us about rewards of sacrifice, and Rusty talked about the sacrifice, the key to Christianity. What is a sacrifice? This is not the sanctuary, so speak up. Don't know what a sacrifice is? How many of us here are Christians? How many of us know what it took to become a Christian? Giving up. Finally got us tuned in. Giving up something you love. But giving it up to whom or to what? Something better. Giving it up to God. When I first went to work with the city, many hundreds of years ago, as Brian was talking about, one of the things I had to give up was our place of residence in Madison, Alabama. We weren't allowed to live in Madison, Alabama. To come to work for Huntsville, we had to live inside the city limits of Huntsville. So we had to give that up. Well, it was a sacrifice if I wanted that job. It was a good one, too. I was making $149 a month. Think about those apples. But now we come to a point in our lessons when we wind all this seek, serve, and sacrifice, where we begin to wind it up. And one of the things I want us to think about tonight as we begin this, because nearly every point that we have talked about, every point that's been made in a way, is about this lesson. Sacrifice. Webster says is an act of offering to deity something precious. We don't just lay these things out and say, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. It's something precious. We'll talk more about that as we go through this. Sacrifice. Now look back at the title. The title says, I am sacrifice. Does that strike a bell with any of you? We think of sacrifice, and we think of sacrifice maybe as a family. husband and wife and kids and aunts and uncles and all that. What are we going to sacrifice to the Lord? I even heard a preacher say one time, in order to be sacrificial in your giving, you've got to give until it hurts. And then he followed that up and ruined what he said, I guess, by saying if you give anything to anything else, give more to anything else than you do the Lord, you're sinning. Think about that one. Here was a man and his family living in a house that belonged to the church. And he said, if you're paying for anything more than what you're giving to the church, you're sinning. He didn't even have a house payment, which I had to remind him of when the sermon was over. He had no idea what it cost to own a house. But he said, giving until it hurts. And that's sometimes the only thing we think about. When we think about sacrifice, we think about giving, and that's true. But we think about giving money. But that's not all it's about. And Jesus taught us how to give, and that settles the question. Let's say, for instance, that I gave. Now, I'm not getting leave Wanda out of the picture because we're talking now about individuals. I'm not talking about your family. I'm not talking about the family at Lincoln. I'm talking about us as individuals. Because in the day of judgment, when we're judged, God's not going to judge Wanda according to what I've done. And I'm not going to be judged according to what Wanda did. And we're not going to be judged according to what you did. How many times do we have to say that? The book of Revelation talks about that we're all going to have to stand and be judged if our name's in the book of life by what we've done in our life. That's individuals. And now you're saying, ooh, you're getting the meddling now. Yeah, I guess I am. That's just what the book says. That's what the book says. Let's just say for a minute that last Sunday morning that I gave $5,000 to the, of course you can see that I didn't, but $5,000 to the church here at Lincoln. What did you think? What would come to your mind? Don't answer, but what would come to your mind? Say, if Tommy Dozier gave $5,000 and put it in the collection plate last Sunday, man, you're going to look up to him. I'm going to admire him. I'm going to get close to him. I'm going to let him take me to lunch, Jimbo. I won the lottery. I have to win the lottery. I gave that. But I want to tell you about a woman. I want to tell you about a woman that only gave 2 pennies. Compared to what Tommy gave, 2 pennies is there's nothing. But wait a minute. You see, we tend to look at sacrifice and we tend to look at things ourselves as worldly people. God looks at it completely different. God looks at things from a spiritual, individual basis. You know the woman I'm talking about. She gave 2 pennies. How much did she give? She gave it all. Where are we going to get food for this afternoon? Where are we going to eat tomorrow? Who's going to pay my rent this week? Now, what made her give it all? Is that what she thought God expected her to do, to put it all in the treasury? What attitude, what emotion, what made her give it all? What'd you say? Love. Spell it. L-O-V-E. L-O-V-E. Love. And faith, because who's going to buy supper tonight? Who's going to buy breakfast in the morning? Who's going to pay my rent next week? Who's going to take care of me? God. Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden.
We're not supposed to worry about it, are we?
No, we're not worried about it, but you know what we do? We do worry about it. We worry about where our next nickel is going to come from. And what does that say to God? God said, I will provide. I will take care of you. If I take care of the flowers of the field and the birds of the sky, how much more will I take care of you? And I go around worrying about what I'm going to do tomorrow. What does that say to God? You don't even believe me. You don't trust me. Me, myself. You know, that's what grandmother used to say all the time. Tell me all you care about is me, myself, and I. Have you ever heard that? Yeah. It means I'm selfish. I'm egotistical. I'm all into self. And I guess that's the way I began to think about self so much. Self, 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 self. And standing out there in the foyer one day, my dear friend, and I talk about him presently, not that he's gone, but my dear friend Hoppy Boyette came up to me, and he says, you know, I discovered something very important this week. And I thought, man, this is going to be good. I said, Hoppy, what did you find out? He said, I found out that until I get out of self, God can't get in me. Now that's profound. And I had to go home and think about that a little while. I didn't have to think long about it because it came from the Word. It came from what God said. I've got to get out of me before God can get in me. Now, we got a lot of scriptures we're going to run through, and I want you to, if you know how to look through the Bible quickly, go ahead and look through quickly. If you want to, get a pencil and paper out and write these scriptures down because we've got some running to do. I'm not even going to look them up for fear I forget where they are. No, I'm not even going to look them up. But let's look at sacrifice from the Jewish side of the fence in the Mosaic Law. Leviticus chapter 22, beginning in verse 17. In Leviticus 22, verse 17, and the Lord spake to Moses, saying, speak to Aaron and his sons and to all the children of Israel, and say to them, whatever man of the house of Israel or any of the strangers of Israel who offers his sacrifice for or any of his vows for any of his free will offerings or they offer to the Lord as burnt offerings, you shall offer of your own free will with a male without blemish from the cattle, with the sheep or the goats, and whatever has a defect you shall not offer, for it shall not be acceptable on your behalf. And whoever offers a sacrifice of peace offerings to the Lord to fulfill his vow as a peace offering from the cattle or the sheep, it must be perfect to be accepted. There shall be no defect in it. They shall not be blind, nor broken, nor maimed, nor have an ulcer, or emphysema, scabs, or any. And they shall not offer to the Lord, nor make any offering by fire on them to the altar of the Lord. Neither a bull or a lamb shall not be accepted. You shall not offer to the Lord what is bruised and crushed, torn, or cut, nor shall you make any offering then in your land. What's he saying? What has God told Israel they have to offer as a sacrifice? That's the good stuff. But God told them, Tracy, what they had to offer. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form. And the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And the light he called day, and the darkness he called night. And he said, and he saw the light, and it was good. And he goes on from there and talks about the next 5 days of what he did. And he gets down to the very last part of it there in day 6, and he said, let us make man in our image. And so he formed man from the dust of the earth, breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. God planted a garden east in Eden. Can you imagine how beautiful that garden is? You ought to see my garden. It's burned up. I picked some tomatoes last week. I brought them into one. I said, these are baked solid. Never had a baked tomato before, but that's pretty good, you know. That's all you got. But God planted a garden east in Eden, and can you tell me what you think that garden was, what it was like? Perfect. Can you tell me what Adam and Eve, after God formed them from the dust of the earth and formed into their, breathing in the nostrils the breath of life, can you tell me what they were? Perfect. So God took perfect people and put them in a perfect garden, in a perfect home, but he's not through. He's not through. When they sinned, you go over to chapter 3 of Genesis and look down about verse 8, and they disobeyed God. They sinned. They ate with the fruit they wasn't supposed to eat of, and what did they do? They looked at themselves and said, "Oh, we're happy," and we're ashamed of it. So they began to sew together fig leaves to cover it up. You know, that's just like man. We sin, and then we try to run around and try to cover it up. Well, we do a pretty good job covering up from each other, don't we, Carla? But do we do a good job covering up from God? No way. No way. If I cheated on my income tax last year when I sent them in, do you know about it? No. Why? I covered it up pretty good, if I did. But who knows about it? God. I hope the IRS don't know about it. No, I didn't. I didn't cheat. I want to say one did. Take over. But now I want to show you what happened. God took them out of the Garden of Eden. And as he sent them out of the Garden of Eden, what did God do about their clothing? He made for them what? Tunics of what? Skin. From what? From an animal. Their sin, their personal sin before God, took an animal sacrifice who had to give up his life, an innocent animal, had nothing to do with what they did, give up his life, give up his skin to make them a tunic in order for them to leave the garden. And what do we just read in Leviticus? That which is perfect, that which is... Rusty mentioned last week about Cain and Abel. Cain brought the firstlings of the field. Abel brought the firstlings of the flock. Well, you know, on the surface, that sounded pretty good to me. A nice, beautiful, luscious tomato, a perfect ear of corn, squash that just didn't, that just sounded rock and roll. He worked real hard. He sweated through the summer days like we've had and brought these things and gave them and sacrificed them to God. And what happened? It was not acceptable. Why was it not acceptable? God just got through saying, I want what is perfect. I want what is precious. I want what is not bruised. Why was it not acceptable to God? Huh? Because it's not what God told him to do. Now, wait a minute. How do we know that's what God told him to do? When we look over in Hebrews chapter 11, down about verse 4, it says, by faith, Abel offered a more excellent sacrifice than Cain. How did Abel get that kind of faith? Now think about Romans 10:17. You know it by heart. Just go ahead and quote it to me. So then comes by and hearing by the word of God. God told him what to offer. And Cain said, I'm going to offer the first things of my crop. Now they sinned. We come screaming all across the centuries. We come screaming all across the generations. And we come to a place where there's a fellow by the name of Abraham who's been promised so many wonderful things about his descendants. And finally, through all the miracles that take place, he has a son. Now, God hasn't demanded human sacrifice. There is no demand or even instructions for God to us to give a human sacrifice. But what did God tell Abraham about Isaac? Take thy only and offer him to me. I don't know about you, but I'd have been arguing. I'd had a little problem with that. But it says, and about Abraham rose early in the morning. I don't rise early in the morning now, but if I'd have been told to offer Isaac, my son, my only son, it was somewhere around mid-afternoon before I got up, and I would probably struggle with a lot of things that had to be done. And Abraham went to the mountain, probably the mountain with the temple set in Jerusalem. That's another lesson for another time. But what did he do? In his heart. Did he physically kill Isaac? Did he physically offer Isaac to God? Now, I say physically now. That's a trick question. No, he didn't. Oh, he built an altar, tied him up, put him on the altar, probably raised it up, that knife to take his life, but he didn't. But did he offer in his heart Isaac to God? Yes, he did, Patty. He certainly did. But let's look at his faith. You look back down the mountain when they first started up, and what did Abraham say to the 3 young men that came with him? Y'all wait right here. Now, I'm using southern, it's just called the southern version of the Bible. Y'all wait right here. We will be back. Abraham, don't you understand? You are supposed to offer and you're supposed to sacrifice. How are you going to say, we're going to come back? Why? He had faith in God that he was going to take care of it. You got a problem? I got a problem. Car broke down. You don't have final tests yet, do you, Taylor? That's a problem, though, sometimes, ain't it? Has the doctor told you you've got cancer? The doctor told you got heart trouble? Has the doctor told you that something you've got and we don't have any cure for it? You got trouble? The old movie used to say you got trouble in River City? Where do we turn? Where do we turn? We turn to each other. That's not wrong, but where do we really need to turn? Who do we need to go running to when these problems jump up? When Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, they ran and did what? Hid themselves instead of running to God and saying, we've made a mistake. We shouldn't have sinned. We shouldn't have done what you told us not to do. But they didn't. They ran away from him and hid and tried to cover up their sin with their fig leaves. Now, this is one point I skipped a while ago, but I'm going to come back to it because it's so important. The garden was perfect. It was beautiful. It was great. They were perfect. They hadn't sinned. They lived in a perfect place. But what else did they have in that Garden of Eden? Verse 8 of chapter 3. And when God came walking in the garden in the cool of the evening, he asked that famous question, Adam, where are you? What does that say about the relationship between God and mankind, whom he created? What does that say? Nothing ever before and nothing since, except for the relationship that we find in the New Testament between God and Jesus Christ our Lord. But they had a personal, they had a calming, they had a peaceful, they had a joyful, they had all of these things that we talk about that we want and we can't find because they had that relationship with God, and he came walking in the cool of the evening. Somebody said one time, what did he look like? I don't know. Probably a good-looking fella. I don't know. Good-looking lady. I don't know. But we do know he came in the garden. He had that relationship. And, of course, the question was redundant because he knew where Adam was. The only reason he asked the question is he wanted Adam to know where he was. Turn to Psalms 50 right quick, beginning in verse 7. Hear, O my people, when I, God, will speak, O Israel, and will testify against you. I am God, your God. I will not rebuke you for your sacrifices or your burnt offerings, which are continually before me. I will not take a bull from your house, nor goats out of your folds. Now watch this. Now this is David talking. For every beast of the forest is mine. He's not being facetious here. And the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know all the lambs of the mountains and the wild beasts of the field are mine. What does God have that we need to give him physically? Nothing. He's got it all. He has it all. Well, what about all them CDs I got down in the bank? They're already his. What about that checking account I've got built up with all this? Now you're going to laugh at this. All that checking account I got down there with Social Security I built up with. Social Security don't build up nothing. But you just think about it's already his. What about that house you bought and paid cash for it, got out of the other house or another house, and it's already his. Where do we get it to start with? It's already his. And then just turn the page there to Psalm 51 of the psalm that David wrote after he sinned. I won't read the whole thing, but picking up down about verse 14, deliver me from the guilt of my bloodshed, O God, the God of my salvation, and my tongue will sing aloud your righteousness. O Lord, open my lips, and my mouth shall show forth your praise, for you do not desire sacrifice. What, is that what we're not talking about? David said, you will not desire sacrifice, or else I'd give it. But you will, and you will not delight in burnt offering. The sacrifices to God, watch it now, and this is the Old Testament, the sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. These, O God, you will not despise. What's he talking about? Physical? No, spiritual. Spiritual. 1 Samuel chapter 15. Then Samuel said, has the Lord as great a delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams, for rebellion is the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is the iniquity and idolatry, because you have rejected the word of the Lord. He has rejected you from being king. You know, there he's talking King Saul. Stubbornness. You know, somebody said that about me just the other day. That's the stubbornest fellow I believe I've ever seen. And he was probably right. But that's not what God's looking for out of me or for out of you. Now remember, we're talking about individuals. I'm not going to the gate and stand on the laurels of Wanda. I'm not going to the gate and stand on the laurels of the Lincoln congregation. You mean we're not supposed to do anything? No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we, when it comes to the day of judgment, are going to be standing there in the day of judgment before the gate, before God, on our own, stripped of all the things, our stubbornness, our pride. And yet when it comes down to making some of these decisions that we need to make as far as God is concerned, well, I gave last week. Or I went this morning. I don't see much need of going this afternoon. Hosea, chapter 6, verse 6 says, for I, God, desire mercy and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings. Did God not say over in Leviticus, did we not read it just a while ago, that we're to give that which is perfect? Yep. God wanted the burnt offering. God wanted the sacrifices. God wanted what was given. Have you put that? Yeah, there it is. I used to think that the altar was about as big as this table. We went to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. If you're ever up there, go over to the Mennonite Visitor Center. They have built a life-size tabernacle, an altar at their place. And that's just about, I was astonished. I was astonished to seeing all of it, but I was astonished to see that altar. It's huge. It's huge. You know, in some of the songbooks, we almost got this one ourselves years ago. We looked at it. But you know, on one of the fill-in pages, I won't read it all, but in one of the fill-in pages it said, and it's written by a man by the name of Scott, he says, in the temple now they're killing the lambs. There are 270,000 will die. The air of Jerusalem is filled with their bleeding all day long as red, and all day as the red-sleeved priests perform their duty of meting out death one by one, they are killed. The temple was hot with the moist smell of blood about it, and a conduit drains from the great brass altar down to the Book of Kindred. 270,000 of them are going to be offered on that day to the Lord. What are we giving? What are we giving? What did God give? All this slaughter of goats and lambs and all that thing was not going to do what God needed to be done, because from the Garden of Eden to the end of time, when heaven is set up, you see what God is doing? From Garden of Eden to the end of time in heaven, that's when we're getting back together with God. Kelly described physically and priceless the things of heaven, of walls of jasper and gates of pearl and streets of pure gold. But what is it about heaven? Those who are faithful are going to be there with God. And what's that going to be in terms of relationship? It's a spiritual place made for spiritual people. We too often sometimes think about it in a physical sort of way, and it ain't going to happen. It ain't going to happen. In Hebrews 13, God said, Therefore by him, Jesus, let us continually offer the sacrifice of praise to God. That is the fruit of our lips, giving thanks to his name. But do not forget to do good, to share with such sacrifices God is well pleased. You see, Jesus died for once, for all. We don't have to go through that again. But what do we got to do? Let him, the man, the woman, let the mankind who is going to follow after me deny himself. Now, what's that? No answer, but what does that entail? I've got to give up myself in order to let room for God to come in. That's what Hoppy was talking about. Romans 6 and verse beginning 9, knowing that Christ, having been raised from the dead, dies no more, death no longer has dominion over him. For the death that he died to sin once for all, and the life he lives to God. When we start making choices, when we might start making things about what we're going to do, we make them individually, not collectively. Don't look around at Tommy and say, well, he's drifted off to sleep. I think I'll drift off to sleep too. That's not what he's talking about. We're to give our best. We're to give the first. And I've said it once, I've said it a million times. I wish everyone could stand up here sometimes and lead singing and watch some of us out here that just try to make me sing. I ain't going to sing. Well, singing's in heaven. Aren't we practicing to go to heaven? Is singing not going to land in heaven? Is singing not part of what we're doing here? Is practicing to go there? And yet we sit around here saying, sing it on. Singing is not a suggestion, brethren. Singing is a command of God. Sing. Make praises in your heart. Y'all know it, and I know it. My mother couldn't carry a tune in a bucket when she was on this earth. I bet she's one of the prettiest singers in heaven now that there ever was. But we sit here and say, oh, I can't sing. That's not what God said. Sing. And make melody in your heart. Give. Give. So that others might have what you don't have. See, how did Jesus put it down just like this? They're thirsty, you gave them water. They're hungry, you gave them food. They're naked, and you clothed them. They're sick and in prison, and you went to visit them. And on and on and on examples that we can see throughout the New Testament. Jesus is teaching us how that we're to make these decisions based on our individual sacrifices to God. saying? Do we hear what God is saying to us? Well, you see, we can't hide it from God. Paul wrote to Galatians just like this. There's only two ways to go, brethren. Walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lusts of the flesh. For the flesh lusts against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh, and these are contrary to one another, so that you do the things which do not do the things which you wish. Now the works of the flesh are evident: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lewdness, idolatry, sorcery, hatred, contentions, jealousies, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambitions, dissensions, heresies, envies, murders, drunkenness, revelings, and the like. And for those who practice such shall not inherit the kingdom of heaven. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. And against such there is no law. Do we have the law of love of Christ in us? When we have to make these decisions, no matter what they are, spiritually, even physically, do we make them thinking about what God wants us to be? Or thinking about what we want to be instead of what God wants us to be? See, that's what this part of what this whole series has been about. Serve with gladness. Become a living sacrifice. Romans 12, 1 and 2. Jesus, our example of sacrifice. Rewards of sacrifice. Sacrifice, the key to Christianity. And I am the sacrifice. How did Jesus put that? I am the sacrifice. Judge not that you be not judged, for with what judgment you judge, you shall be judged. I don't judge you in your Christianity. You judge me in my Christianity. Why? Jesus said not to. Why? Because it's on me individually. And it's on you individually. I make a wrong decision. I do. Far be it for some of you that think I'm perfect. I'm not. But I do make a wrong decision sometimes. I wish somebody had taught me this lesson when I was in high school. I really do. We'll finish up at our Devo. Thank you very much.